What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk about today. Once again, we have the area of interest coming off the Central American Gyre, expected to organize and develop at a very fast rate in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico before striking somewhere in the Gulf Coast. We also have Invest 96L that's kind of meandering and hovering around in the subtropical Atlantic, and the remnants of Gordon, which I will not get too much into because the chances have been dropping like a fly pretty much. So we'll have to pay attention to all those systems. But our main threat for now is this area in the Central American Gyre, this area in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico, as this does look like a hurricane is growing more possible at this current point. So let's go ahead and jump right into it now. Here's the situation that we have. We now have a 50% probability of formation in the next 7 days. In the northwestern Caribbean Sea and southern Gulf of Mexico, a broad area of low pressure could form by the early to middle part of next week over the northwestern Caribbean Sea. Thereafter, gradual development of the system is possible, and a tropical depression could form as the system moves slowly to the north or northwest over the northwestern Caribbean Sea and into the southern Gulf of Mexico through the end of next week. 0% chance in the next 48 hours, 50% in the next 7 days. You're seeing those probabilities continue to increase each day, and that's stuff you're going to have to watch because this does look like a very big threat down the road. Yes, the chances have gone up slowly, but as soon as you get that orange or yellow X right there, it's go time. Things are going to get pretty frisky. Things are going to get pretty interesting for those really anywhere in the Gulf Coast. But I will say anywhere from Louisiana to Florida do have the greatest impact of getting hit from this system, so we'll have to watch it. I still do not think it's going to be heading over to Texas or anything like that. I think Louisiana East is more appropriate forecast based on the ensembles and based on their operational runs, which we will show you later down the road. But ultimately, that's the new situation that we have, and this is going to be over some really great conditions that we will get into in a few minutes. But first, here's what we have going on. This is Invest 96L. This now has a 10% chance of formation in the next 7 days. The system's going to probably dissipate in the next 12 hours, I would say. An area of low pressure about 650 miles northeast of the northern Leeward Islands is producing disorganized showers and a few thunderstorms. Environmental conditions do not appear conducive for significant development of the system in the next few days, while it drifts westward at about 5 miles per hour over the central or western subtropical Atlantic. We're down to a 10% probability of development. So 96L, I am not too worried about. Now, here's what we have in terms of the remnants of Gordon. They also dropped this down to 10%, just looking at it right now. Showers and thunderstorms have been displaced further away from the center of the area of low pressure, located 1,000 miles southwest of the Azores Islands due to strong upper-level winds. Significant development of the system is not expected while it meanders over the central subtropical Atlantic over the next couple of days. 48 hours has a 10%, 7 days is a 10%, so that's stuff we're going to have to watch. But ultimately, the main stuff we're paying attention to right here, of course, is this area in the Western Atlantic Ocean. Also, we know that the Madden-Julian oscillation is going to be really ramping up in the next few days. I have we have a couple of tweets that were shared here on the Storms United Discord server. I'm going to go ahead and try to pull those up very quickly so I can show you guys that. But in the meantime, we are seeing the return of the Madden-Julian oscillation coming towards the Atlantic Ocean in the next few days. Actually, I saw those on Weather Kingdom's video from a couple of days ago when he was covering that as well. Shout out to him, by the way. Be sure you go subscribe to him and leave a like on his video. He really much appreciate that. But ultimately, he did cover that, and we are expecting the MJO to arrive in the next few days, which will be perfect timing for the Central American Gyre system as it approaches the Gulf of Mexico and the northwestern Caribbean Sea. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the Western Atlantic over here, because what are we noticing right now? A lot more convection is firing off in this part of right here off the coast of Nicaragua. This is the main system we're paying attention to right here. I am also noticing, I don't necessarily think this is outflow. I don't think this is attached to anything right here, but you are seeing a much more concentrated area of convection over the last day. Let's go ahead and go back to about 120 frames. That's 20 hours back, just to kind of show you the evolution. You didn't have much convection firing off the southwestern Atlantic Ocean, and then last night you started seeing a bunch of convection firing off into this morning, as well as more and more frames continue to show up. We're at basically at 1845Z, and we've seen convection pretty consistent over the last 10 hours, and things continue to ramp up. Now here's the main question: is this going to sustain, or is this going to fizzle out tonight? That's the main thing that we're paying attention to, because typically what we see with tropical waves is we see the convection really look scary, really blow up for a period of about 10 to 12 hours, then things start to die down, things start to calm down, and then you don't see as much convection anymore. And it looks like you are starting to see that phase of dying down convection, at least in the last few hours. Let's go ahead and go back to 30 frames back. But you had this convection really blow up, then you're starting to see it die down once again, although you are still seeing some more areas of popcorn and convection going on in the northern part of that area as well. So we're going to have to pay attention to that as well, because ultimately, what's this gonna do? Is the system going to be the convection that sustains and allows for this tropical system to develop, or is this going to be a situation where we need to wait a couple more days to get more information? Because what I will say, this system has plenty of time to organize and develop. It's going to be moving very slowly across the northwestern Caribbean Sea into the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to be moving at a relatively slow pace, so it has time on its side. The main question that we're going to have to pay attention to is this system going to develop in a timely and orderly fashion? Here's what we have going on with the water vapor imagery. As you can see right here, we're not seeing much dry air intruding it. There is a little bit of dry air on the eastern half of the Caribbean Sea, but it's not affecting this part or this area of convection right here. There's also some dry air in the Gulf of Mexico, but you're seeing more of that mesoscale convection starting to fire off. Depending on what happens with that over there will depend on how quickly this starts to moisten up. But one thing I will say, and there is a scenario that I have been paying attention to as of lately, is the kind of the dry air aspect of it. I'm not saying that the dry air is going to get into the system and choke it off or anything like that, but I remember a particular scenario where with Hurricane Laura back in 2020, it entered the very dry Gulf of Mexico, and then the outflow just absolutely exploded and pushed every single ounce of dry air, with the exception of the dry air that was already in the system, just trying to slow down its intensification initially. Pushed it completely out of the Gulf of Mexico and gave Laura a much more refined and a much more favorable environment to explosively intensify. And that's what I remember from that back in 2020. That was a very infamous case of that happening. And I'm curious to see if that will happen again, because I will say this: more likely than not, that's not going to happen. It was just that Laura was one of those rare scenarios that just pushed all the dry air out. I'm wanting to see if that will happen, and that will determine what happens while it's in the northwestern Caribbean Sea, because you have all this moist air, you have all the time in the world to organize and develop. Once it enters the Gulf of Mexico, what's it going to do? So that's the main stuff we're going to be paying attention to right now, as the conditions continue to get more and more favorable and things continue to get more and more put into place right here as we continue to take a look. So let's go ahead and pull up right now the global sea surface temperatures. Where the huge burst of convection is, I say this like a broken record, 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living on the Gulf Coast watching this system. Where it's going to be entering is in an area of about 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. That's going to be 86 to 88 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's going to be interchangeable in the northwestern Caribbean Sea, and that is already pretty alarming to say the very least, because not only are all the tropics just piping hot this year, and things continue to escalate from there, but what you're noticing, especially with the northwestern Caribbean Sea, is how deep down all that water tends to go, and how deep it ends up going. Let's go ahead and show you the ocean heat content very quickly. Over 175 to 200 OHC. That's pretty widespread, ladies and gentlemen. And I can give you today's map as well for September of 2024 as well, because I was showing June yesterday or the day before. But here's what we have on September 20th. Still very widespread OHC. You're still seeing that Gulf Stream and that loop current really exploding in terms of the ocean heat content over there. And then you're going to have to take a look at this in terms of the depth and in terms of how deep this water goes down. A lot of this water is over 500 feet deep, 150 meters deep. For those of you, for comparison, that's about 40% of the Empire State Building underwater, underneath water temperatures of at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Just for context right there, because it's the best way I can really describe it. I can kind of, because the water temperature in the ocean is very deep, and a lot of people don't really understand how deep 500 feet in the ocean is. That's pretty much the Empire State, 40% of the Empire State Building right there. And that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Like, the ocean is deeper than even some land masses as well. Like, the Marianas Trench is about 7,000 feet deeper than Mount Everest is tall. So I just wanted to go ahead and briefly talk about that very quickly, just because a lot of people don't understand how expansive and how deep down the ocean is. Even the Caribbean Sea goes down pretty deep as well. So you're seeing all this warm water going down at extremely deep levels over here, and not just concentrated in the Caribbean Sea, but also in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Atlantic Basin, especially around the Bahamas, in the loop current right there. That's a very deep area of waters right there. And then you have this continental shelf over here on the Gulf of Mexico that makes the water shallower and shallower. So that's something you're going to want to keep close tabs on as well. Last thing we're going to go ahead and show you is the wind shear. Wind shear continues to be pretty interesting. I am noticing there is a bit of an increase of wind shear over here. I was taking a look at that. I want to take a look at the imagery as well to see if that's affecting anything. It is affecting this area a little bit right there, but I am not seeing that much noticeable effect on really the tropical development or anything like that, mainly because this is going to be a temporary surge. You're going to see that wind shear start to fall, start to go away, and then you start to see that 10 to 15 knots of wind shear really return across much of the Caribbean Sea over here. And then in the Gulf of Mexico, yes, you are seeing some high wind shear values over here, but they don't crack any much higher than 40 knots. That from what I've noticed. And you're also going to see the ridge start to build in over here and really start to allow for all this trough over here and all this shear to kind of exit the Caribbean Sea from what we've been noticing. So that's what we're looking at. Let's go ahead and show you the shear and the moisture forecast just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at right here. This is the 200 to 850 millibar. These are the anomalies. I wanted the wind shear itself, and we have the courtesy of the European run right here. You see this massive ridge over here that's built up over Texas, Oklahoma, those areas right there. That ridge is going to continue to lift up, and you are going to see a bit of an increase of the Caribbean wind shear over here, at least for the next 48 hours. Then you start to see that wind shear start to go down, down, down as tropical development starts to get its act together, and then you start to see ultimately that wind shear start to lift up further to the north. And then I am kind of interested, I am kind of curious of all this wind shear over here in the Gulf of Mexico from the European. I want to see what the GFS is thinking as well, because I want to see their thoughts on this as well. Okay, the GFS is definitely seeing that wind shear getting stronger, but it's having it lifting up and at an angle where it's going to help enhance the outflow. So you're definitely seeing two conflicting models from this right here, and I am a bit curious to see how this system will play out. And ultimately, the wind shear is going to be one of those things where we don't know exactly what's going to be going on. In terms of the moisture, you're going to see a huge moisture infusion in the Caribbean Sea and in the southern Gulf of Mexico as well, as we continue to monitor this as well. In fact, the entire Gulf sees this huge moisture infusion right here, and that's going to ultimately help the system organize and develop very quickly. And this is one of those LoRa scenarios I was talking about previously, but ultimately it's going to have to be a wait and see type of situation, because there's a lot more things that we're going to have to keep very close tabs on, a lot more things we're going to have to watch before we can definitively say, oh, the conditions are going to be very explosive in terms of development. Because right now, I do believe this is pretty easily, in my humble opinion, a hurricane contender, and a lot of the operational runs and ensembles, matter of fact, I can go ahead and show you that, agree with me. Here's the 0Z GFS ensembles right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at these right here. the 0Z GFS ensembles still relatively spread out in terms of intensification, still want things to happen, and still a lot of them want them to get up to hurricane strength, but it's so spread out right here. It's kind of interesting to see how this plays out, and I think it's kind of confusing the operational run, at least in terms of the 0Z, because I did notice there was some runs that were really stretched out and all that stuff, and I was looking at that, I was like, okay, there has to be some sort of bad data going on right here, because let me go ahead and show you the European run very quickly, the 0Z right here. Look how stretched out the wave ultimately gets right here. I mean, the European doesn't have much going on, but the CMC, from what you're noticing, okay, this is the 12Z, but here's the 0Z right here. The 0Z really stretches out right there, and I have a feeling that the CMC 0Z is kind of filled with bad data that was kind of inputted when it initialized, so that's kind of playing into it. Now you have the 12Z GFS. 12Z GFS still scattered right there, but once again, majority of the ensembles keep it between Louisiana and Florida, and look at how much stronger these ensembles get compared to the 0Z. That's very alarming, and that's very interesting to pay attention to, because what I'm looking at right here, yes, you're going to see development at this current point, but now you're seeing a huge plethora of areas that ultimately could see a potential hurricane moving through, and this is why I said this is easily a hurricane contender from right here. Here's the 0Z European right here. The 0Z European was having the system moving into the Bay of Campeche over here, the Bay of Campeche. 12Z from yesterday, not as organized. 0Z is more concentrated as well. I do find that kind of interesting. So there is a disconnect between the European and the GFS. Personally, I'm leaning towards the GFS, not because I think the GFS is going to be that one system, and I think it's more aggressive and it's going to look good, but mainly because the GFS has been more consistent this year. The GFS, shockingly, has been more accurate for this hurricane season than the European has been in other models. So, W for the GFS, I will tell you that. And now, let's go ahead and show you some operational runs to kind of give you that full scope and that context right here. Here's the 12Z GFS. I'm going to go ahead and pull up for you right here. The 12Z GFS has the system moving through the Yucatan Strait, quickly organizes and quickly intensifies, gets up to a 976 millibar Category 2 hurricane before making landfall in Louisiana as well. But I will say the topography of all of that will help bring potential severe weather like tropical tornadoes and all that stuff to the deep south in areas that Francine really impacted before. Let's go ahead and show you the CMC run as well, because the CMCs, other than that one outlier run from the 0Z, has been relatively consistent. CMC wants this to enter the Yucatan Straits, maybe impact the Yucatan Peninsula, and then organize and really ramp up and make landfall as a Category 2 hurricane in Louisiana right here, over here near Lake Charles, and that region where Francine impacted as well. So that's not going to be good news for those who are affected by that. I'm curious to see what the NavGem thinks about this as well. The NavGem definitely wants the system to organize and develop, although they are relatively inconsistent. But look at this, 937 millibars in the Gulf of Mexico. That's something you do not see every day, and that's definitely something you're going to want to pay attention to. 0Z had this at 987 millibars, so that's a massive uptrend from the NavGem run. I do not trust it. I think this run is a bit outlandish, and I think it's a bit further to the west than a lot of the synoptic conditions are allowing for it to, because this wants the system to hit Texas, and I don't think that's going to be the case so much. And last run we're going to go ahead and show you is the Icon run. The Icon run wants the system to impact the Florida Panhandle as a strong tropical storm or weak hurricane, and then move through the Midwest and bring some impacts over there. So ultimately, we're seeing kind of a full house in terms of all the models agreeing that development's going to be happening, and they've been very consistent with it over the last little while. And this is all stuff that we are going to have to watch, we're going to have to pay attention to, and we're going to have to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel, and we will continue to monitor it. We'll get you more information out as we can. as we get more data from the models and more data from the ensembles, as well as from the National Hurricane Center and all that. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor Patreon. If you want to help us out and support me personally, be sure to join the Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. Also, if you want to come hang out with us at Storms United and talk tropics and ask questions about this potential hurricane threat we're watching for those tuning in from the Gulf of Mexico, be sure to join our Discord server. The link to that is right over there. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.
Buzzsaw 32 says Bobox was the tutor all along. Bourbon Slush 32 says ask Josh if anyone gave him a Sonichu medallion. Ryoma 32 says it's alive. Pat's Path Predictor through 10 says welcome back, Augie. I love your streams, man. Hope to see you around more.